The Manchester Ship Canal and all that it bears owes itself to the 17,000 hard-working labourers who built it. Regular navvies earning just 4.5 pennies old money per hour for a 10-hour working day. Manchester was now home to Britain's third busiest port, despite being 40 miles inland. The Manchester Ship Canal was a kind of presence in our lives when we lived in Flixton. Partly because if you went in one direction, you couldn't go any further without crossing over it. Every other direction, you could just keep going till you got to Manchester or Stretford or Alter or whatever. But if you wanted to go in that direction to Earlham, you had to go across the canal, and the only way to get across it was a ferry, which when I was small was a rowing boat, and then later on when I was a bit older it became a floating platform that could carry 2 cars. For some reason in those days you couldn't cross by the locks. There was these gigantic locks, 2 locks next to each other at Earlham, and you weren't allowed to cross over the lock gates, although later on when the ferry stopped you were allowed to go over the lock gates. But we also used to be taken down. Well, I did. I was the youngest. Taken down with my mum and dad and perhaps my older brothers to watch the big boats going through the locks on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, and it was quite a popular pastime. Lots of big ships going past, and they kind of towered above you, and the sailors would wave at you. And also, it also used to be an area that we would go and play in, because there was like tracks that went down there and open land that you could play on. Very few fences in those days, so you could climb over the railway embankment, you could go under the railway bridge to the other side and watch the Mersey flowing in to the canal, and the great big power station there, and also the whole of mainly the other side of the canal, the Earlham side, was very industrial. There's a steel works which used to make all these big noises, clanging sounds, and there was a big chemical works which isn't really there anymore, which used to have noises and flames and things. Candle works, and the other big thing was that the canal was very, very polluted, and there were tales about people falling into the canal, and that was it. It was a death sentence. If you swallowed one mouthful of canal water, you were basically a goner. By the time they got you to hospital, you were so poisoned that you just died. So consequently, I had this big fear thing of like, God, don't, if you're playing down near the canal, whatever you do, don't go near the edge, don't whatever. And there was a thing I remember also. There was an accident that happened at the next ferry down, which I think was Cadishead, where the canal caught fire and burnt everybody to death who was in the ferry. And at the time it was blamed on somebody throwing a cigarette out, but years later it transpired that nobody was smoking. What had happened is a ship had cleaned out its fuel tanks or something like that, and this volatile fuel had flowed along the canal and it just burst into flames. I always used to have, it had a presence, because the crossing of it used to make the other side seem like a more important place than it probably was. I mean, Earlham's a pretty boring place, in fact, but because it was quite it was like a barrier. I used to dream about going to Earlham for some reason. I used to always also have sort of little sort of nightmare type things about being in the ferry and the ferry sinking. Or I remember one that I had, which I've never forgotten for some reason, where I had to kind of cross this bridge that was only as thin as a brick, and I had to balance my way across this bridge of brick. And so and we used to hear the boats going down the canal at night. Because it didn't stop at night. There weren't as many, but there were boats going through the locks at night and down the canal, and you could hear them hooting. And sometimes when we were a bit older, we would go down there, or we would be down there at night, and there were like these lights flashing along the side of the canal. So it was all quite exciting.